Welcome to this event today. Hello, everyone, and welcome here today with Students for Liberty. In this event today, where we're going to speak about Cuba in this platform called Learn Liberty, powered by Students for Liberty. My name is Andres Guilarte. I'm a research associate with Students for Liberty. I've been part of this great organization since 2015, when I used to be a local coordinator back in Venezuela. And it's a pleasure to be back here in the organization and being able to speak about these really crucial subjects, not only for Latin America, but for the fight of freedom all over the world. Right now, we have Alejandra Franganillo, which is a local coordinator based in Miami. She's 22 years old. She's currently studying political science in the Florida International University, and she's also the product from Cuban immigrants. So I'm going to leave you the floor right now, Alejandra, so you can explain us a little bit more about that Cuban heritage and your fight for freedom.
Hi, I'm so honored to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Alejandra, as you say. I was born in San Juan, Puerto Rico, but my parents are Cuban. And my love for Cuba is, not only by blood, it's by heart. I grew up in a very fierce Cuban household. I have the privilege of being born and raised in an organization, an institution called El Círculo Cubano de Puerto Rico, which is the Cuban Circle in Puerto Rico, where it's an institution that receives exiles from even before Castro, from Machado. And it's an institution where we are all raised in our traditions, in our culture. So I grew up in that. And I grew up seeing how my grandparents and my parents have given everything for the cause of Cuba. So it's really important for me now to always speak about Cuba, speak about what's happened, because it is the image that I know and the image that I want to honor. So for me, Cuba is my homeland, because it's in my blood, it's in my heart. And I think that knowing what happens and knowing that we should strive for its freedom is imperative in my life. And I always knew that throughout my life, my biggest wish is that I can get to see the happiness in my grandparents' face and in my parents' face, that Cuba is free, that we can go to our homeland without any mystery, nor any struggle. Just enjoy it in the freedom that it deserves to be. So, yeah.
It's such a privilege for us in Students for Liberty to have you not only in the organization, but also in this event. We were supposed to also have another guest, Gloria Alvarez, but unfortunately, she has some problems with the schedule and wasn't able to make it. So Alejandra, let's start getting into the subject. There has been a lot of protests, widespread protests all over the country in Cuba, and it's something that never happened in the last 62 years of its history. And it's everything behind in social media under a hashtag known as CubaLibre. So could you tell us a little bit more what lies behind this hashtag and what is the current situation with the protests in the country?
Well, let's start simply. The protest began on July 11th, and it was a widespread protest. It was unorganized. I woke up not knowing anything about it. Every Cuban American out here was like, what is happening? There is the initial thing that started up and brought it up was in Matanzas, which is right next to a very tourist place called Varadero. Hospitals were collapsing. People were in the streets and on the floors dying. There was no medicine. There were shortcuts. And the hashtag that really started was SOS Cuba, that people were getting attention on what was going on in Matanzas. And then all of a sudden we had a widespread protest. But let me be clear, these protests are not because of COVID, nor because of what's going on in Matanzas. The reality of what happened in Matanzas is what's happening all around Cuba. There is shortcuts in hospitals everywhere. There is shortcuts for basic necessities. So the protests are really a reality of what the effects of the socialist system. So in the SOS Cuba, it's not that we need medicine nor we need food. It's we need a change of system and we need the dictatorship to end. So the hashtag Cuba Libre, I think that is a very interesting topic, because Cuba Libre, that phrase has always been so prominent in Cuban history. If we go back to the struggle of Martí, to the 1930s government, to the 1950s, 1940s, Cuba Libre has always been that phrase that has been conjoined to whatever was going on. For example, what happened in 1898 when Cuba, left Spanish rule, Cuba Libre was meant, we want a Cuba that's free from Spanish rule. And in the 1920s, it was like, we want a Cuba that's free from American intervention. And then in the 1940s, we want a Cuba that's free from dictatorship because we had Machado. So it's a very ambiguous thing that has kind of like faded out with every generation that has happened. But really, what Cuba Libre is freedom, is liberty. And what I think about Cuba Libre, and I hope that people strive for when we talk about freedom for Cuba, is saying we want Cuba to have efficient institutions that protect individual rights, where Cubans have the chance to prosper. And that means the system that contributes to pastoralist capitalism. So that is what Cuba Libre is. Not Cuba Libre because we can say all these things, oh, Cuba Libre from the dictatorship, from the social, but what then? You know what I mean? So really the protest, going back to the protest, is really the call for the change of system, because Cubans are not scared anymore. This was unprecedented, but in reality, it's the effects of a 62-year-old decadence that can no longer be sufficed. So yes.
Awesome. And you just mentioned that it's also a call to change of system. And I want to emphasize on that system. And many people around the world, when they speak about Cuba, they may say it's not a dictatorship, it's something else. You think it's fair to call the Cuban government in Cuba as a communist regime?
It is a communist regime, because who is in the party in control? It's the Communist Party of Cuba. It is a communist government. That is its label. So what really insults me as a Cuban American, that I've had, seen on the news, that I think, no, it was that the Spanish government does not call Cuba a dictatorship. And I think that's insulting for so many of us that have been in this struggle, that people would, shadow away the reality of what it is. And I'm going to give you an example. I was talking to a person in one of the protests, and she was there. She didn't know, she was just there for solidarity. And she was like, I'm dying to go to Cuba because I want to see, and, Cuba's this glamour and this, this prohibition that it's, that secret island that nobody can go to. I was like, well, if you want to go, I suggest you do not, so you're not going to have a good time. And then suddenly we changed the subject to Venezuela. And she's like, oh, I'm not going to Venezuela. That's a dictatorship. People are dying. I was like, it's that double standard. It's that double narrative that people do not know the real issue of Cuba, because it has been like overshadowed by an image that is not true. Cuba is a dictatorship. And if I can say, it's worse off than Venezuela, because Venezuela has been for 22 years, and at least you guys have an opposition. But Cuba is a completely totalitarian system in the Nazi style fashion and the Soviet style fashion. So yes, it's very insulting that some people don't call Cuba a dictatorship. It's laughable. So yes.
I completely agree with you that it's insulting. And not only with Cuba, it also happens a lot with my country, Venezuela. And the same thing with the Spanish government. They refuse to call the regime in Venezuela to what it is, a totalitarian regime, a socialist regime, basically killing his citizens. But you were mentioning something key in the subject, which is a comparison that many people make between Cuba and Venezuela. And it's the fact that in Venezuela, we have an opposition. We can discuss about if that's an opposition or not. But we have political parties different from the ruling political party. You don't have that in Cuba. But another thing that is important to note in Cuba is that, at least when I have seen it, and many Cuban friends tell me the same thing, the ones behind this protest, even though that you said at the beginning that they were not organized, it feels that they were sparked by the artists in Cuba. The San Isidro movement last year, the Patria, Ibida song early this year, and I really want you to get your opinion on this. Do you feel that artists are actually behind the grassroots and the sparkling of this new protest in Cuba?
My stance on it is that it's thanks to the artists that we have this kind of mobilization. That's what's going on, because first we have the Movimiento San Isidro movement that was last year, and it was a group of artists that went out to protest for freedom of speech, to have not their artwork censored by the state, because the state decides which artwork is the best and which one suits the revolution. And I think that and then we have the most amazing song that ever happened, which is Patria y Vida. Cubans are in the streets, and everyone here in Miami, people in all over the world saying Patria y Vida. And it's the song by Gente de Zona, Yotuel, December Bueno, and Funky, and oh my God, I forgot his name. But yeah, you guys know. So it is because of these artists that have taken the central stage. And if I am being, my strong opinion is that they are really the center. They're the organized center of it all, because there really isn't in Cuba a group where you can say, oh, they organize it. Those are the ones that are in the front. The ones that are in the front are the artists. And I think it's just wonderful what they have done. I mean, it's incredible. Jotuel was here on Sunday, July 11th. And he was talking about, the massive success that the song has, worldwide. But he said, there is no success that compares when I hear my people in Cuba singing that song, and when they are in the street saying Patria y Vida. So yes, I would say that it's thanks to the artists that they have kind of like, cemented that seed of liberation and of motivation, that there is some pride. There is pride, and there is this honor that we can no longer say patria o muerte, homeland or death. We're saying homeland and life, which is what we Cubans want. We want life, we want quality of life, and we want prosperity. We no longer want to live in a system where we are succumb to misery. We don't want that. So yes, thank you, artists.
I think it's amazing with everything that you just said, and the fact that we can see in practice how art through freedom of speech can actually challenge a totalitarian regime. When we see artists using the tools that they have available in places like this, just speaking out through songs, through movements, and they have been able to sparkle the biggest protest in 62 years of the communist regime in Cuba. And I think that's amazing and something really respectful about these artists that I also saw some of them here in Washington, D.C. when they were in the protests. So Alejandra, another thing that I like to point out is that, well, in Cuba, you don't have, like I said in the previous question, you don't have political parties. You don't have visible opposition leaders. So who's in the front? We already spoke who was behind the protest, but who's in the front right now in this protest? Is it an advantage or a disadvantage to not have visible political leaders in Cuba?
I think that it's, I have to mention them because there are opposition groups in Cuba. They're just not recognized as, in Venezuela. We have La UNPAC, La Unión Patriótica de Cuba, who's José Daniel Ferrer. We have Las Damas de Blanco. We have El Movimiento San Isidro, that's new. And additionally, we have a lot of dissidents. One of them is Guillermo Fariñas, who I have the privilege to meet many years ago. But when I say that there is not someone in the front line. There is not like a unit. There's not one group. There's many groups that are conjoined in the struggle. You know what I mean? So it is, how do I say it? It is an advantage, but I also see it as a disadvantage, because for movements, there has to be a conglomerated, group where we can organize, where there are tactics, where there is a, conformed and unified mission to do. But right now, there is really no organization. The protests happen because people, neighbors, and on Facebook, on, the town groups, they were like, oh, we're going out to protest. But there wasn't really a group that said, okay, the whole island is going to protest. No. So it is a disadvantage for future, future manifestations where it's going to be, like that, unprecedented. But I definitely do believe that there has to be a unitary group that has to be there, that has to lead. And I think that there is, we have, like I said, we have the UNPAC, Las Damas de Blanca. They just have to conjoin and say, this is the group, join with the artist, so that everything can be going in a singular manner. Yes.
Yes, I think that, as you were saying, I mean, you have groups, you have social groups, but it's not like you have political parties. I believe that, well, in Venezuela, that might be a disadvantage at times, but it's different contexts in many places. Another thing that I really want to get into is social media. I mean, not only in Cuba, but we have seen how important social media has been in many conflicts around the world, because it gives citizens, it gives individuals the key to get the information out, to saying what is going on in the ground. So can I get to your opinion of how important has social media been right now, how important it's going to be, and not only inside, but also outside the country?
Let me tell you, it is because of, let's start with the internet. Cuba has been a 62-year island that has been completely isolated from the world. Before the internet in 2014, when Obama had the talks, and the new openings, Cuba was literally, nobody knew what was outside of the world. Nobody knew how other people live. When we went to go visit our families before the internet openings, and they were like, how do you do this, and how does milk expire? It's things like that that people do not know, and people do not know how we live and how in a free society things are like. So in 2014, when Obama had the talks and people had the chance with their phones to see what's going out of the world, they started questioning. They started, this is all being a lie. And it's been a very progressive thing where Cubans are saying, we deserve something that, accommodates to how we want to live. We no longer want to be under the hat of revolutionaries and the 26th of July movement nor Castro. We want to be Cubans. We want to be individual. Let's start like that. So social media, I think, is right now the most powerful arm that the Cuban people have right now. Because if it weren't for social media, none of this would have happened. Because it is through that flow of information, and it's through that flow of understanding and understanding and striving for something better that this has happened. So I say again, if it weren't for social media, this would have never happened. So I think that right now it is important that Cubans stay connected to the outside world. It's important that we here in the outside community see what's going on. And I was talking to one of my family members, and it was like, if we do not see that you guys are with us and that you know of the atrocities that were happening, we're not going to continue. Because for 62 years, we've been alone. So I think that social media has to continue to play a role, has to continue to be prominent. So that's why we are pushing for the United States government to kind of supply independent internet, because every time protests happen, internet has been cut. And we've been estranged from what has been going on. And there's been a lot of confusion. There's videos from on Sunday that people are telling you is from yesterday, and it's not the case. So yes, social media is important, and I think it was the instigator of what is going on right now in Cuba.
Completely agree with you. And it's great that you touched what some actions can happen from governments like the US. Why? Because before that, let's get into the motivation that goes behind the protest. And let me explain that. There is many people outside Cuba, which it always is people outside our countries that have the questions about our motivations of the protests in our countries, that are saying, well, Cuban people is just fighting for vaccines and food. And well, that's it. If that were the case, if they get vaccines and food, the protests are over. So what is your opinion, that it's just vaccines, food, and services, or there is a deeper call for freedom behind all of this?
There is no, the videos are clear. The videos are there. What are the Cuban people chanting on the streets? They're not chanting vaccine, or they're chanting food. What they are chanting is freedom and down with the dictatorship. To say that Cubans out there risking their lives, there's 155 detainees and even more disappear where we know their whereabouts. Do you think that they would sacrifice so much for food and vaccines? No. This is a noble cause. This is a cause for freedom. This is a cause that we're fighting against a totalitarian dictatorship that has been for 62 years. So it is insulting for Cuban Americans to hear when people say, no, just Cubans are protesting for vaccines and food, and now once they have it, they're going to calm down. No, the shouts were clear. The exclaim was clear. And you talk to any Cuban on the island, and they'll tell you, we want a change of system. We want this to end. Enough is enough. So it is. Yeah. I want everyone who ever says that this is because of scarcity of food and vaccines. I want you to go and see all of the videos that are out there. The shouts are clear. Freedom.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. Freedom is the call that Cubans are asking. And it's a deep call, and it's a war call to go out for the streets and fight for that. And especially after 62 years, Alejandra. Can you tell me a little bit more why to our audience that maybe don't know too much about the Cuban history and the Cuban regime. How is it that this regime has been lasting so long, or so many decades, and they're still in power?
I think there's just many different factors that contribute to the stability of the regime. I would say first that if you look at the historical context of the revolution, people wanted change. We just had a dictator, which is Batista, and then you have Fidel Castro promising democracy, promising restoration of our institutions, and then all of a sudden becoming totalitarian. But I think that the thing is that as you talk to many Cubans of that time period, when I talk to my friends, I asked them, why would you just let it stay in power? And it just took us swiftly by storm. Nobody knew. And one day you had your business, and the other day you didn't, and there was nothing else to say. I was talking to my grandfather. He was like, one day I decided to leave the country, and the next day I was imprisoned. It was a thing that happened so fast, and how militarized and how strong and how stable and how totalitarian the effects that came to be, that there was really there was so much fear, and there was so much scare that it just took them by storm. And the regime has been stable because Fidel Castro, as I say, he was the most evil man in the world, but he was also very smart. He laid out a blueprint. He had training from the Soviet Union. He had the perfect model, embodied by the Nazi regime, the Soviet Union, and it has managed to stay because of that. He managed to isolate the island. He managed the internal embargo, and I think most of the other part is that Cubans decided to leave the island, and it has been an exile crisis where people are fleeing, and there has really been no fight because of the situation, of what was going on. And and a lot of things have a lot to do with the remittances that family sends, that have in part have maintained the regime, the propaganda, the 62 years of uniformity, of obeying and saying we will be like Che Guevara. It's those things that when you especially study political science and you see how totalitarian teams are, it's a machine that is so strong and so imperative that it's just it's hard. It's not all like a democracy where you go and protest in the streets and you'll see definitely a change or an amendment. It's not like that. So yeah, it has a lot to do with many different factors.
And you touched on a key subject, which is the wrong idea that many people had about Cuba, especially socialists. They love to say that Cuba is the pearl of the Caribbean because they have the best healthcare, the best education, role models of Fidel Castro and Che Guevara. I can go all day long explaining people how is that not the case. But you as a Cuban, how do you feel when you hear people saying all of that and they start thinking, well, that Cuba is actually a world power in all of these subjects, healthcare, education? What do you feel about that, and what's actually the truth in the social injustice that you see in Cuba?
I think that I'm just gonna, if it, when people say that Cuba is a paradise because it has free education, I will go on to say that, okay, if it was free education for all, my grandfather, when he decided to leave the country, but he had military of age, so he had to stay. And so it was 3 years of military service, and he was like, okay, I'm going to, take care of, take advantage of my time and go to, to college. When he got to college, he went to admission. They were like, you cannot attend because since you are leaving the country soon, the revolution cannot invest in you. So when people say that Cuba has an education for all system, it's just baffling and it's disrespectful. Because my grandfather was not investing to them because he wanted to leave the country. And what happened next? He got imprisoned for 3 years in the Cuban concentration camps. So it's really emotional for me to say this story because it's just, it's like a slap in my face. You know what I mean? That you have it's such a big part of my heart because my grandfather could have been able to study, could have been able to go to college like a normal person would do. But no, the revolution decided not to. And in the case of medicine, if that were true, why does my grandma have to go every year to Cuba to give out medicines to her family? If healthcare is so great there. There is more than 50 members of my family, and every year is 50 members and more to give out food and medicine because there isn't any. So it's insulting. And I think that as a Cuban American, we always have to explain ourselves and tell our testimonies for people to understand. And it's exhausting to know how in the world can you say that in a socialist system that healthcare is going to be so great when there is no capitalism. You know what I mean? When there is no supply and demand, how can you say that? It's just even in the logical sense, you just have to know that how a system works and how an economy works and how supply and demand works. You have to know. But when we go to the case of talking about Cuba and talking about testimonies, many testimonies like mine and many testimonies like millions of other Cubans that have had that. So no, it is false. There is no education for all. There is no medicine for all. It's us Cuban Americans that have to, take out of our backs and go and help out our families because doctors and the Cuban medicine doesn't do that.
Incredible the story of your grandfather is. I know you feel that you see like you're emotional about that, and that's what
It's
many
really
people don't
emotional.
understand. Yeah, and that's what many people don't understand when they hear descendants from Cubans, from Chinese. I mean, all these totalitarian regimes in history, and soon in that letter, the descendants of Venezuelans, and they believe that what they're telling is just text and paper, but it's actually stories of families destroyed by these regimes. And another point that I wanted to get into was that, well, isn't the US to blame for all of this? Isn't the US economic embargo and the sanctions the reason that the so-called socialist revolution hasn't been able to establish what they wanted to establish in the country? And therefore, if the sanctions and the economic embargo is lifted, well, Cuba is going to be a prosperous country from one day to another. I have heard those exact words from many people, from all kind of ideologies. So what do you have to say about that myth of the U.S. economic embargo and the reasons behind the misery that is widespread in Cuba?
It's just like a question when somebody, has that kind of argument. I say, okay, the embargo is lifted. Can Cubans own property? Can Cubans vote? Can Cubans leave the country freely? Can Cubans go out and protest freely? No. It has nothing to do with embargo. And second of all, the embargo exempts basic needs like food and medicine. I mean, last year, the largest exporter of food in Cuba was the United States. So I think that the embargo is it's not even in the conversation right now. And I will tell you personally, I do not agree with the embargo because it serves as a justification for the Cuban government to say, oh, we have an embargo. Our problems are because of this. Is the embargo. And you talk to any Cubans, they'll tell you the embargo is 24/7 in our television. So the embargo is to blame. So when the United States, the embargo is off, there's no more embargo, who do they have to point their fingers to? Nobody. But coming back to the point, the embargo has nothing to do with what was going on. It has nothing to do with the protest. It has to do with the decadence of the system that has never worked and will never work. So, and it's insulting for me as a Cuban American. I think this whole situation has been very insulting when you have non-Cubans coming to you and trying to explain what happens in Cuba as if you don't know, and you're baffled and you're like, why am I being explained when I live this in my own I live this through my eyes. So the embargo is not in the conversation. The embargo should be something that we point out, but it has to be the essence. And it's insulting when people say, no, what happened in Cuba because of the embargo, that unfair embargo, that Cubans cannot live freely and they can't do anything and they've been blocked for 62 years. That is not the case. That is not the case, because there's that same people that tell you that go out and say Venezuela is a dictatorship. But when it comes to Cuba, no, it's the embargo. No. It is the same root. It is the same product. It is that same socialist system, totalitarian system that has, succumbed our countries into misery and repression and just pure pain. So, like I said, if you want to go out and talk about what's happening in Cuba, please do not mention the embargo. Don't mention it. What you have to say is that Cuba has a dictatorship and it needs to end. That's it. That's all.
As clear as that. That's all the Cuban people want. And that's the next question. That's what the Cuban people want. That's what everyone that loves freedom wants for Cuba. But how is the tomorrow looking like? What is going to happen now? We have seen protests in Miami, protests here in Washington D.C. Asking the government to do more. We're seeing that in Cuba there's still protests, but the government has just escalated and escalated the oppression. And there's things that we can't see because not everyone in Cuba, like you say before, had access to internet and social media. So worse repressions and torture are happening, and we don't know what is going on in the ground. So how is tomorrow looking like for Cuba? What is going to happen with your country?
Okay, so as of now, things have died down because of the repression. I mean, the repression is awful. I had a conversation with one of my friends in Havana. It's like things are looking very hot here. Things are hot here. It's not, this is going to continue. There has been, well, it's been, it gets me really emotional because the fact that, you know, we are here talking about what's going on in Cuba, and you have people there that are, you know, state police are going out and knocking on their doors and, you know, killing students and killing individuals, all because, you know, that because of freedom of expression. So it's really emotional for me to get to talk to this. But I think that right now we're living in a state of insecurity because, as I said, repression has been like never before. People are very scared, and I talked to one of my family members, and he told me having this conversation here, because we were talking about what was going on, is very dangerous because our phones are being surveilled. So as of now, I do see that things are dying down due to the escalating, you know, repression that's going to continue. You know, the regime, like I said, this was even unprecedented for the regime. So this has been a situation which they're trying to control with the way that they know how to do, with the iron fist. So, but the flame is still there. The flame is there. The flame of change is still brightening on the island. And like I said, this is the beginning of the end. Because a year ago, you would have asked me, oh, do you think that Cubans will go out in the street and protest like Venezuelans do? That it was marches of millions of people going out in the streets and, you know, saying down with the dictator, down with Maduro, down with Chavez. You would have asked me, would Cubans do that? I would tell you no. They're never gonna do that. They don't. It's impossible. So when this happened, it was like, whoa, things are changing. There is something that just people are recognizing that this is the system that they no longer want, and that they want to be able to prosper and live normal lives and live a life that they want to strive for, whether it is whatever thing they want to do, but it's the freedom to choose, because that's what's lacking in Cuba. There's no freedom to choose what to do. You're under what the state tells you to do, you know, what the state tells you to be. The state is the god. The state is everything, and it dictates every part of our lives, and Cubans don't want that anymore, you know. So what I can say, what will be going on, is that this will continue to escalate. This is not going to be a one-time thing, and definitely, like I said, the beginning of the end, for sure.
Hopefully, I had faith in that same scenario that you're giving. I hope that just like in 2013 when we were protesting in Venezuela, we didn't know if we were going to protest again, and we did it in 2017, and then we did it again
Exactly.
in 2019. So I hope that this is also a starting point for Cuba to start protesting more and more, because now the world, if they didn't know before, now they know that Cuba is under a totalitarian regime and their people are all asking for freedom. So let's get into some questions from an audience, Alejandra. So we have
Yes.
Glenn, and he's asking you, what are the ways freedom information gets into Cuba? Is it radio, USB drives, DVDs, internet? How do people receive information in the island?
Mostly how Cubans receive information is through the internet. I mean, you know, the state is a Texan, the state is a state-controlled internet system. But you know how Cubans are. They will invent themselves, and they, you know, have, you know, there's this thing that was going on that was called el paquetico, which is that, they would send you like a little chip, like a little type of USB, and you would connect it to your computers, and you would see different type of movies, you would see different types of news, everything. So but mostly where Cubans get it is on the internet. Yes, they have Facebook. I mean, some things are censored, obviously, but for example, me, when I talk to my family members, I would send them screenshots of any news, of any something or recording, and they would see it. So it's mainly the internet. Yes.
Incredible. And that's why it's so important that one of the actions is to get internet to the island, so that information can still
That
be
is
received.
pivotal.
Yes. So another question is from Joshua. How can the US get around the regime and provide aid directly to the people of Cuba?
That is something that, Joe Biden recently announced that he will allow for remittances on the island. But my question, as someone who has lived through sending remittances every month, the government takes a large portion of what you send. So how in the world can you provide aid without some certain government interference, which is very questionable, and I did not like that resort that he decided to do. But there are many organizations that do send aid into Cuba right here in Miami. One of them is Cuba Llama, which is for calls. There was other one that was called, I have the list, I will send you, but there are certain organs that work individually, but I still do certainly question how is it possible for you to send aid without the government interfering, because they will interfere. So it's a very tricky thing to do. Let me tell you that. I don't know. That is something that, the United States government has to talk to the Cuban Americans as how you can facilitate that. But it's very tricky and very complicated. So
yeah, it's a really complex subject. So our next question is from Ogundare Bright. Do you think that the US sanctions on Cuba is doing more harm than good, since the effect of those sanctions affect the average person living in Cuba? So this is like the kind of argument that many people also do in Venezuela because of the sanctions, is that, well, sanctions, yes, they target the regime, but eventually in the long term, they may also target the average person. So what do you have to say about that?
do you mean the sanctions that they placed on the generals, or just sanctions in general? Because of what I've known,
Both.
certain sanctions, both. Okay,
Well,
so
yeah, he didn't specify, but let's assume that
yeah.
both kind of sanctions.
Okay, let's start with the sanctions against the the generals. That is just a decorative thing. It doesn't work. That doesn't work. That is nothing. That's not going to do anything. That is just for show. We're sanctioning the generals, but that's not going to work. The other sanctions that you mentioned, I think that you're speaking about the embargo. I think that's what you're referring to. Like I said, the embargo is not in the conversation. I just, last year, the largest, exporter for food in Cuba was the United States. The embargo does not exempt basic necessities. So the sanctions do not really affect daily Cuban American lives. What affects the Cuban Americans daily, I mean Cubans on the island, is the internal embargo that the communist dictatorship has against its people. That's a real sanction. So yeah.
Great. So the other question is for Noah Leviner. What role do you think Ludwig von Mises' ideas have in ending authoritarianism?
I think that Mises did an amazing writing that was called Socialism, and I think that Ludwig von Mises has exemplary ideas on individualism and the fight against totalitarian states. So I think von Mises and other liberty thinkers are prominent in this fight, because what Cubans are striving for is prosperity, individuality, a system that works in order for Cubans to have the possibility to achieve. And that's what we libertarians talk about, the freedom to prosper, the freedom to choose our own lives. So yes, Ludwig von Mises, Hayek, Thomas Sowell, all of them have very important roles on this fight.
Absolutely. Now Bruno is asking, maybe Bitcoin can help in the
Hopefully.
struggle in
I
Cuba? What do you
Yeah,
think?
I heard that Bitcoin, that you can send Bitcoin to Cuba, and I think that could help too. I do not know the effects of what Bitcoin has had, but I do know it's there. But I really do not have, there's really nothing been going on, but I hopefully it can.
Awesome. The next one is from Yetel. Today, Mendrala met with Carlos Lasso. The current USA administration ignored our request for e-meeting. The ones asking for freedom, my question is, what can we Cuban Americans do to help Cuba?
The thing that we Cuban Americans can do is stay on the fight. It's continuously, advocate, continuously keep educating non-Cubans on the subject, continue, educating, advocating, pleading to government officials of what is going on in Cuba, and knowing and telling your family members, telling your friends in Cuba that they are not alone in this fight. So yeah, we have to keep on the streets. We have to keep protesting. We need to keep calling international attention to our cause, because if we don't do that, this is going to die off and nothing will happen.
Great. The next question is from Joshua again. Will remittances through Bitcoin make it easier for Cubans to get around the regime taking a cut?
Like I said, I do not know the extent of how Bitcoin can help through remittances. I don't know how it, I think I have to have like a conversation with somebody that does know that. But so it's like I said, Bitcoin is great. It's an independent currency. I just have to see how it works in a totalitarian regime, but hopefully it will. But, like I said, past remittances are, they take a large portion of what we send to our families, and every remittance that goes into the island is, taken away from the government. It has to go through, government intervention. So let's see. Hopefully, it can.
Yeah, and it's also the same case in Venezuela. How can we can help our
Okay.
The next question is from Michael. What are your plans to promote CubaLibre? How can we help you, Alejandra?
My plans to promote Cuba is I've been on my whole social media. You can follow me on my Instagram. I'm daily posting videos, ways to help. There's incredible pages on Instagram. Let me tell you, Mima in Cuba, she's amazing. Fabiola with love. You have a Revolucion Cuba, a Center for a Free Cuba. There's so many organizations that are keep promoting what is going on, ways to help what is going on in the island, have direct conversations with people on the island. So that's how you can support. Keep spreading the message, keep spreading the videos, keep spreading what Cubans on the island have to say of what is going on. And most importantly, always say that what is going on in Cuba has nothing to do with the embargo, has nothing to do with Republicans or Democrats. It's Cuba fighting against a 62-year-old dictatorship. So yes.
Great. Another question is from Bruno. What did the United Nations vote against the embargo have done in the last 29 years? I mean, what has the United Nations role been in the Cuba situation?
The United Nations, I think we all have agreed that it's insulting and it's baffling, it's disgusting to see that in the Human Rights Council, Cuba has a seat and Venezuela has a seat. So the role that the United Nations has played in a part of the Cuban is zero, nothing, because you cannot sit a country that has millions and thousands of human rights violation in a Human Rights Council. I think that that's enough to say. But I do have to agree, and I do have to say that there has to be a presence of either peace soldiers that have to go to Cuba and make sure that when Cubans go out to protest, they do not fear for their lives. It is the only thing that we can ask of the United Nations. But other than that, their role has been insulting. But, maybe, I don't know, maybe there is another entity that can provide the same resource of peace soldiers into Cuba. I do not know that. Hopefully someone could educate me on that. But other than that, no, the United Nations has not been an ally. No.
And neither for Venezuela or basically
No.
any other country
Or any other
under
country.
socialist regime. But well,
Nope.
that's organizations. So the next question is from Stephen. What do you say to university students wearing Che Guevara t-shirts and showing support for the Cuban regime, and being thousands of miles away from the island?
So when I see students wearing a Che Guevara flag, it's like, I always go up and approach them. I think that, and I go and say, "Why are you wearing his shirt? Like, what? No, because he was, a glamorized revolutionary. He helped so many causes. And like, do you know that he was racist, that he was homophobic, and that in his journals he told his dad, Dad, I figured out that I really like to kill. He said that black people are lazy and that they're dirty and they do not serve the revolution. Have you looked into that? It's like people who talk about communism. Have you read the Communist Manifesto? They don't. It's just ignorant people, like I said, that look into a narrative that's very ambiguous, that's very marketed, that is very like when people see Fidel Castro and even Chavez, they're like, oh, he was a great leader. He defended so many altruist cause, because that's the thing. People in these days, they want to be altruists, they want to be allies for causes. But when you look into it deeper, it's cynical. So when I say to people that wearing Che Guevara's shirts, you're like, do your research and talk to a Cuban American that lived through it. My grandfather would tell me that Che Guevara would coordinate live executions in their hometown with no fair trial, with no other reason. They would just shot them on the streets, and that was it. So that's what I would say to them.
Yeah, I agree. It's unbelievable how there is people with a murder t-shirt, with a murder face on their t-shirt, and they're claiming they're with the people. Who knows? Maybe tomorrow we're going to start seeing more Chavez also t-shirts.
Yeah, and
I
I've
mean,
seen
it's insane.
Andres, I've seen so many people, celebrating Chavez. I think I was the other day walking around here, and then there was this guy wearing a Chavez shirt, and I was like, I had the chance to be sitting next to him. And I was like, why are you wearing his shirt? And he's the same thing. He was a great revolutionary. He did so many great things for Venezuela. He was an altruist. He cared about the poor people. And I was like, do you see what's going on in Venezuela? And he's like, no, that's because he died and that's not his government. Maduro's an idiot. And I was like, no, socialism is the same recipe with the same disastrous effects. The same recipe that is in Venezuela was in Cuba. Cuban happened to export it. You see? It has nothing to
Yes.
do with glamorized leaders. You have to see the results of what they did. So, yes, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's insane. It's insane how
It's
people keep
insane.
vanaglory these murders. But
And I see that you are
that's,
Venezuelan, Andres. You're Venezuelan, and
yes,
it's insulting when you see someone with a Chavez shirt. How do you feel
of
about
course
that?
it's insulting.
How
Yeah,
do you feel
of
about that?
course it's insulting.
It's
It,
insulting.
it's, it, it just make my blood, boil. It's insane. But that's why it's so important to fight that misinformation with information, like all the wonderful information that you have given us during this event. I mean, it has been a privilege. Now that we get
Thank
to the
you.
end of the event, to have it with us
Hmm.
is a privilege for SFL to be with you. And also, let me give you the comment, not only personal, but from SFL's organization. We wish for all your family members in Cuba the best wishes that they can, stand against the regime, and also that they have health, and well, that maybe one day you can be reunited with them in a freer country. Now, let
Hopefully.
me give you the final thoughts. I mean, what do you think is going to happen to Cuba again? What are your final remarks, and what are your words, not only for Cubans that are listening to you, but everyone in the world that is part of this great network that wants to hear, some motivation and some remarks from the hopeful freedom of Cuba in the future?
So I want to start that had this great conversation with a friend that he saw one of my other previous interview that I did, and he wrote to me, and I told him, if you need anything, I'm here in Miami. I can send you whatever you want. If it's medicine, I'll find a way. And he told me, Alejandra, what I want is for this to end, and you're already working on it. And that filled my heart and my soul with so much joy that I, someone from Cuba, for me to say that I am playing a role for freedom, for Cuba, my parents and my family's homeland, but for other people who are in this, this very noble fight, because this is what it is, a noble fight. So my what I see for a freer Cuba is, like I said, that there is this flame that will not, burn down, that it will continue burning high and high and high until we'll finally see our final goal. So what I can say is that in the future, Cuba will be free. Cuba will be free. And I know that there will be no other Cuban that has to die without seeing their homeland free. And what I can say that to everybody here that's watching and to the people in Cuba especially, I want you to continue this fight and know that you are not alone, that we Cuban Americans, although some of us did not have, the chance to be born in Cuba and to be born free, we are here and we are communicating, we are advocating, we are your allies. We are under your watch and we are under, your armor. We are there. So what I can say is that this fight has to be continuous, and anyone who wants to be an ally has to keep talking about it, has to keep saying the truth. And the truth is that this is a dictatorship and this must end. So what warms my heart for the future is that I feel so motivated when I had this conversation, is that I am not going to stop. And I know there's thousands of people, millions of people that are not going to stop until we finally get to see Cuba free. So I'm really, really honored that I had to have the space here, that I get to talk with you, that I get to talk to everyone here watching. And it's just, I come here with a grateful heart to say thank you for listening to me, because this is how we're going to do it, and this is how we're going to strive for it.
It has been our privilege, Alejandra. And as a last comment, to all our audience, yesterday we spoke about Venezuela, about Nigeria. Today we're speaking about Cuba. And unfortunately, most likely tomorrow we're going to speak about another country, other people around the world, our society suffering under totalitarian regimes, under socialism, under communism, and people looking for freedom. That's why we should never stop fighting for freedom everywhere that we are.
Never.
And organizations like Students for Liberty are at the forefront of that fight. Students for Liberty and all these platforms like Learn Liberty are managing not only the next leaders of tomorrow, but they're also informing, educating everyone they can about what actually freedom looks like and what a free society may be. My example, in 2015, when I joined this organization, I used to believe that socialism was the idea because that's how I was taught in Venezuela as a child. Thanks to Students for Liberty and all the wonderful things and people that I met, now I'm also a fighter for freedom, just like Alejandra and just like all the members of this great organization. So I encourage you, all of you, to follow Students for Liberty on social media, to follow the events that are going on, the events that are coming up, all the educational programs and educational videos in Learn Liberty, and never keep up the fight. Never give up. Just like Alejandra was saying, the flame of liberty will keep up. And I'm sure, Alejandra, that with people like you, with Cubans fighting for their country, there will be a better future tomorrow for Cuba and for all the countries in the world.
And I also want to say thank you, Students for Liberty. This organization is incredible. I mean, I welcome anyone to join who wants to be a future activist for not just, Cuba, but for any cause of liberty, because I think that the most beautiful thing to strive for is for freedom, and I always told my grandfather has always told me, when he left Cuba, he did not leave because there was no food, because there was no, there was no freedom. Freedom is vital, it's inherent. So it's something that we always have to promote and protect. So thank you. This organization, Students for Liberty, incredible. Really grateful to be part of it.
And we're grateful to have you too, Alejandra. So thank you, everyone, from the
audience. Thank you, Andres. Thank you.
Bless you, everyone. And we hope that Cubans are listening to us. Keep up the fight. SFL is only with all of you, with everyone fighting for freedom all over the world. So thank you again to the audience. Thank you, Alejandra. And have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you all. Bye.